Today, though, the United States, no doubt, is going through a lot. Now, police in Ohio just released body camera footage showing officers shooting a 25-year-old black man to death. It's an incident already sparking protests that, sadly, we've seen before. It's a moment of political division, perhaps more than we've seen in many decades. And the world's attention seemingly went from shocking gun violence at schools to being fixated on the Supreme Court overturning 50 years of established order. Both issues affecting virtually everyone in the United States. And with Russia waging war in Ukraine, American assistance, guidance, leadership, it's all in demand. That's where our conversation starts right now. We're joined in the studio by Marc Schulman, editor-in-chief, History Central editor, columnist of Newsweek, and Dan Perry, also joining us, international affairs analyst, former Middle East editor with the Associated Press. Both of you bring a lot of experience, a lot of perspective on issues affecting America. Marc, I'm coming to you first. It's 4th of July, looking at the U.S., something I threw out there in the opener is that maybe we're seeing political division we haven't seen in many decades. Do you compare what we're seeing in America today to any previous chapter? I know there were fraught issues, let's say in the 1960s or wherever, that divided America, but this feels like a polarized camps on any issue at this point.
I think it's more analogous to the period before the Civil War. Not necessarily we're going to go to a civil war, but
it's ominous.
The depths and the divisions are deeper on one level. On some levels, they're not deep at all. When it came to the Civil War, there was a real issue. The issue being slavery, very clearly, and it was both a personal issue and an economic issue, and the South felt it was fighting for its economic survival, at least those people who owned slaves. Now it's more of a cultural issue more than anything else. And it's this sense, certainly among some Americans, that they're losing their country, whatever that's supposed to mean. They're losing to the elites on the coasts. They're not true Americans, and all those sort of things. And that's created quite a divide. And you look at the map of America, whether it's gun control or whether it's abortion, there are red states and blue states. And it's not a political statement anymore. It's a statement of social values, of religious values, of all those things. And it's created really strong divisions. But we need to keep in mind that even in the reddest of the states, for instance, Texas is 55% red, so to speak, right, and 45% of the people don't believe in any of these things. It's not quite like the Civil War period. But you have these states controlled by almost right-wing reactionary groups at this point in terms of their beliefs, and it's quite dangerous.
You mentioned right. I mean, we're looking at California, these blue enclaves, quote unquote, around the cities, a red state sort of surrounding it. So it's not as clear cut, perhaps, as it was in Civil War days. But Dan, looking at the issue of abortion now, thrown back to the states essentially to figure out. We're seeing this debate now shape up. How divisive, how damaging. I mean, essentially, can America tear itself apart now debating abortion in the upcoming elections and for the years to come?
Abortion is just one issue.
Yeah,
I mean,
just one among many. Right?
It is truly sad. 4th of July, I think. America's in the midst of a cultural war of such toxicity as to make Israel look civilized by comparison, almost. Yeah. Where you have, on the one hand, progressives who want to jump forward 1,000 years and to a world where everyone is gender fluid and humor has been banned for fear of giving offense on the basis of identity. And reactionaries, on the other hand, who want to go back 50 or 100 years to a time of patriarchy and flirtation with white supremacy. And in the middle, a dwindling, I'm not sure if it's a minority or a plurality, but a dwindling group in the middle looking on horrified and feeling not just that the country's gone berserk in two different directions, but that it's ungovernable because of a system that is desperately dysfunctional, largely because of the Senate and the Electoral College and this cult of the Constitution that renders everything unfixable, because it's difficult in the current polarized environment to see any further amendments.
And Marc, do you feel that sentiment? I mean, going around and just talking to my own circle about the 4th of July, it's a celebration. A lot of people responded negatively to me, saying, what's there to celebrate this year? What are we doing? We need a protest. Along those lines, you're talking about a local club of Democrats, albeit, who are out to protest today. This is not a celebration day, essentially.
To a large extent. I mean, look, it always seems darker than it ever was. I mean, I'll remind you the fact that for those people, 3 or 4 years ago, President Trump was President Trump, and he's no longer president. And he may not be, hopefully he won't be president again in 2 years. So, it's hard to say that it's, darkest now. Yes, the results of Trump's presidency are being felt now because the Supreme Court appointments are the ones that people are going to have to live with right now. Look, America has had a unique ability to bounce back. That's one of the things that we need to keep in mind. And despite the originalist view of the Constitution amongst many of the Supreme Court justices, Jefferson always said you need to make it as reflective of the times. And somehow, over the period of time, there's been a self-correction in American politics. I tend to be a bit of an optimist when it comes to American politics, in the sense that I think it's going to be very difficult in front of a very difficult years, but I think there'll be some sort of mechanism for self-correction. I think if we look at the people who are supporting the far-right agenda and the extreme religious agenda, most of them are going to be dead in 20 years. So, I mean,
certainly
that's the way of looking at correction.
I mean, I would certainly agree there are reasons to be optimistic. I mean, America sits on a quarter of the world's money supply. America is a font of incredible innovation. America still is the world's policeman and arbiter of what is reasonable if it wants that role. But on the other hand, and here I would differ slightly with my colleague, although there is a history of bouncing back, and although America is amazing in myriad ways, you currently have a situation that seems to enshrine minority rule. And you have a situation with the Republican Party where this, one of America's two major parties is morphed into a grouping that Mussolini would feel comfortable in. And the system is one that seems to make permanent minority rule. Because given that every state has 2 senators, and that includes states that are 60 times smaller than other states, this means that about a quarter to a third of the people who may want to go back 50 years to a patriarchy that flirts with white supremacy, about a quarter to a third of the people can impose their will on everyone else. And the difficulty is that this looks unfixable. There may be no way
is it that concerted of an
bounce
effort,
back from that.
Mark, do you see it? I mean, is it that concerted an effort? I mean, how deep does the political memory go? In other words, I mean, 2 weeks ago it was gun control, the hottest thing in America. Today it's abortion. We're seeing, Black Lives Matter come back to the streets. Is it that institutionalized?
Okay, I would say on the right, it's very institutionalized. Yeah. The right wing has been playing a long game. It's similar to what's happened in this country as well, where they've been playing a long game. The Federalist Society was created. They made sure the judges all came out of the Federalist Society. They were not, I mean, some of them went to Harvard or Yale, but they made sure they were, got the stamp of approval from the Federalist Society. It's been going on for 50 years practically, an attempt to recreate the Supreme Court. And they work part by part, day after day. And while the liberal other side works on today's issues, responds to today's issues, protests against today's issues, what are they doing about educating those people who don't agree with them for 20 years from now or 10 years from now? They're not doing it. It is so analogous to what's happening here in this country over the last 20 years.
Where does the Supreme Court fit in? I mean, we've seen the Supreme Court now, utilized by the politicians in many ways. Do you see problematic nature in what's emerged at the Supreme Court?
Yeah, it's become completely political. I mean, I think recent polls show that about a quarter of the people believe the Supreme Court is doing its job properly and have faith in the idea that the Supreme Court interprets the law as opposed to makes policy.
That personally feels more damaging than
I don't agree it's political, I believe it's ideological. In other words, it's not so much it's political, Republican or Democrat, although, if they had to make a decision, they would, not totally. It's not. These are deep ideologues, which is more dangerous, frankly. Politicians can change their views based on the way the wind is blowing.
Maybe that's part of the issue. I mean, it used to be that you had reasonable people in both parties, and really the parties were almost like a club, and the ideology was spread somewhat evenly across the political system. Today, you know what the two parties stand for, and increasingly they're being dominated by the extremes in either party. More so, I must say, in the case of the Republicans. Yeah. The Trump wing is dominant among the Republicans. The progressives are not yet dominant among the Democrats.
I want to get your thoughts on President Trump and some other aspects of U.S. issues. We're going to hold on, you guys, and stick with us through the break here. Now, we do have to step out for a short 2-minute break on Zoom In here. We'll be right back. Much more on all the issues. Again, happy 4th of July. Now back on Zoom In, continuing as we were focusing on the U.S. Still joined by Marc Schulman and Dan Perry here. Thanks for being with me, both of you. I know you both bring a lot of institutional, long-term exposure to the issues. We just got into President Trump here before we went on to break here. I mean, it appears there's signs that he's gearing up for a 2024 run at this point. Is he the front runner, Mark?
Well, we have to say automatically he's the front runner in the terms of at least initial polls and the fact that he has all this money. He's raised a tremendous amount of money. And he has these people who believe that he's the Messiah and there's nothing stopping them. Yeah. Will he really be the front runner in the end? What will happen if he actually gets indicted? All these different questions.
I don't know. With these January 6 hearings, did they actually carry political weight at this point? I mean, we were just touching on this in the break. Trump feels like an untouchable figure in many ways. Can this touch him?
Well, first of all, an indictment actually can touch him. I mean, number two, if he's found guilty of being involved in an insurrection against the government of the United States, he cannot run. He's
can that
precluded
happen
for
right
running.
now in the polarized climate we've discussed? I mean, can an indictment come forward on President Trump?
Ironically comes down to Merrick Garland, who is the person who's kept off the Supreme Court by the so-called McConnell rule that disappeared a few years later.
Right.
He is now the person who will decide, I think, whether to prosecute Donald Trump. I agree that if he's prosecuted, that might make a return more difficult.
Okay.
On the other hand, you have a third of Americans who are 2/3 of the Republican Party who will be convinced by nothing.
That feels like the case. That it just doesn't really matter what emerges from this. President Trump aside, right now we have President Biden, and he's coming to Israel next week already. Mark, I want to get both of your thoughts on this. I mean, it's a major swing through the region, or at least a significant set of summits, visits, countries he's going to. But what appears to be the most significant pressing issues when he's coming to Israel?
Look, he's trying to put together a deal where he gets more oil. That's his single most important thing, is to open the spigots in Saudi Arabia. And if in the same time he can arrange for additional relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, providing a backstop, because it looks more and more like the JCPOA with Iran is not going to happen.
Okay.
So if he can do that at the same time, all the better. And I think that's what he's really looking to do. He's not interested in the Palestinian issue. He'll make a couple of nice statements because he has his progressive wing of the Democratic Party where he has to...
Yeah, does he have to answer to that, Dan? Is there actual pressure on Biden right now to sort of say something, do something on the ground in Israel?
I don't think so. I think the government in Israel just wants to get to November without any undue difficulty. And as for Biden, his focus is on the midterms. And he wants more oil from Saudi Arabia, obviously. He would like to show some leadership, I think. But mainly he's concerned about not losing the majority in Congress.
And from the Israeli side, you mentioned just getting through this, getting to elections here now. Is it a big moment for now Prime Minister Lapid? What's your thoughts?
Oh, look, absolutely, in the sense that that Lapid wants to show that he's prime minister, and he wants the image of him as prime minister. And Bibi, over 4 years, managed to run as prime minister and decide the terms of what was being discussed. And Lapid is going to try the same. Look, I think it will work in Lapid's advantage. I mean, Lapid has some charisma, much more so than Bennett ever did. And he knows how to act in terms of the cameras and everything else. And I think we'll see a Lapid that people say, maybe he wouldn't be so terrible if he's prime minister. Will that make a difference ultimately as people vote? I don't know.
Is there a sense, Dan, that Lapid is maybe the favored candidate of President Biden? Does that factor in?
There's no question Lapid is the favorite candidate of President Biden.
I put it out there softly. That's what I bring you.
No, I think Lapid is strangely underrated by a certain proportion of the Israeli public, and he will have a chance. With a Biden visit, and in general, with 4 or 5 months in power, to project leadership, and I think he will. He does have charisma. He's very quick-witted and sharp. He knows a lot about the world, and America's clearly on his side. So I don't think anything of substance will come out of the meeting with Biden, but a lot of projection of leadership by both of them, I think, may happen, and it could well work to the benefit of both.
Yeah, we hope there's some positive stories around that visit here. We'll certainly get into that a lot more in depth when it comes here. But Dan Perry, Marc Schulman, thanks for getting into this. My little special 4th of July focus on America. Not all pretty as it was, but certainly important to get into today. And so thank you for joining.